Okay, guys and gals, we're going to push on here, cover chapter 18 of your driver operator manual, and it covers stabilization of the apparatus. Some of this information is going to be repeated from the last chapter, but repetition is good in the sense that it helps you to retain that information. It's good for your memory. So, some considerations to be taken into account when you're stabilizing. Okay? An air apparatus is a system of connected components that affects the stability. Okay? Now, if you're not using your outriggers, okay, your base of stability is pretty much that rectangle right there between your four towers. And you see that on the diagram there. Okay, that is your base of stability. All right. So when the device, when you take it out of the resting position, okay, when you take the aero device out of its cradle, the suspension begins to take on more and more weight as the device is raised, okay. And it also puts the apparatus in a less stable position. So any time that you're going to raise the aerial out of its cradle, put the stabilizers out. Okay. Put them out. Make sure you put your pads down every time. Every time you take it. Now there may be some extenuating circumstance where this may not be feasible, but quite honestly, I take that back. I really can't think of any. You may have to short jack one side, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But if the aerial's going up, stabilizers need to be out, and they need to be set. So when you put your outriggers out, if you notice the diagram, now you see you have increased your base of stability. Now it's just not that rectangle that is created by those four tires, but now you have a larger base for your aerial apparatus. All right. In this diagram, you see your base of stability again, that tan area that's on the outside that encompasses where the outriggers are. Now you're seeing where your center of gravity is, where your aerial turntable is. So if you're rotating your device 360 degrees, okay, it's going to trace out a circle, a gravity circle, okay, and you see it up here, the center of gravity is shifting along that circle there, okay? But as long as that circle stays within your base of stability, you're good to go. Okay? The apparatus will remain stable. Now, talking about short jacking, okay? There are instances where you may have to do this, okay, where you can't deploy your stabilizers on one side of the apparatus or on the other. So, one rule of thumb with short jacking is you are only going to operate the aerial device on the side of the apparatus that has fully extended outriggers. So in this instance, in this diagram, you see your gravity circle. The right side of the aerial device in this diagram is where you're going to be operating your aerial device. You have a reduced base of stability over the entire apparatus, and particularly there on the left side in this diagram. So you're not going to be operating your apparatus on, your aero device on that side of the apparatus. Okay. Now, newer apparatus, and I believe all of ours do. Again, you need to check with your particular apparatus that you are operating. They may be equipped with limit switches or rotational interlocks. What they do is they prevent you from swinging that aerial device to the side that is short jacked. But don't rely on these interlocks. Okay? Don't get so worked up that you forget that you have short jacked aside. Okay, so just don't even try it. Don't put the aerial device on that side of the apparatus, okay? Don't put those interlocks to test. You remember it, don't put your aerial device on that side. Okay? If you're parking on a lateral grade, okay, a side-to-side grade, then you're going to see here that your center of gravity shifts, okay? And it may shift where that circle is outside of your base of stability. Okay, so now you can potentially cause the apparatus to tip over or to become stable in a sense, and the aerial device collapses over. Okay, overloading the aerial device itself, and again, you need to know what your apparatus can do and what it can't do. So overloading it can have an adverse effect on the apparatus stability. Okay, by overloading the aerial device, that circle there increases in size. When it increases in size, and then it goes outside of that base of stability, okay, and then you're unstable, okay? Potential for the aerial device to fail or for the apparatus to fail. Okay, so we'll be using our stabilizers. There are several different types. There are 3 types are listed up here: post type, the box type, and then A-frame as well. Okay. All right. Some considerations taken when you're transferring power to the hydraulic system. Okay, so what you're going to do is to get power to your system, to get your outriggers out, to get your aero device up and in operation, you'll be activating the PTO, or the power takeoff. Okay, this creates pressure in the hydraulic system, okay, and then produces power in the hydraulic pump. Okay, and that pump sends out pressure, puts pressure on the fluid, and then we can operate our stabilizers or our aerial device. Okay, don't operate your PTO, don't engage your PTO until you are properly positioned on the scene. Okay, and again, remember the conditions, the things that you need to be thinking about as we covered in the last chapter when you're trying to position your apparatus. Okay, so the process of engaging the PTO is pretty much the same over all different types of apparatus. Okay, that switch, and most of y'all probably already know this, particularly if you're assigned to one of these apparatus or if you're already certified, but the switch can be found on the dashboard. It can be found on a panel that sits between yourself and cap, or maybe on a panel that's above the driver's seat. Okay, it can be an air-operated switch, pneumatic. It can be electric, it can be hydraulic, or a combination of these things. Regardless of the type of activation switch, again, the overall process is pretty much the same. Okay, now in this slide, there are procedures for engaging and disengaging the PTO depending on the type of transmission. We no longer have manual transmissions on our department, so we're not going to worry about that. Okay, so we're going to have to worry about automatic transmissions on apparatus that either have a fire pump or apparatus that don't. Obviously, those aerial apparatus that don't have fire pumps are our truck companies. Those that do, Squirt 9, Squirt 17, and then our Quints. Okay. Most newer apparatus have what's called a hot shift PTO. Okay. Attempting to engage a PTO from neutral in a vehicle not equipped with a hot shift system could result in damage. Okay, I am fairly certain, again, you guys are driving the apparatus, you need to make sure, but I'm fairly certain all of our apparatus do have hot PTO systems. Okay, so let's say you've already got your water pump or your fire pump engaged, okay? You're supplying a couple of lines, a couple of hand lines. Now the fire starts to get out of hand where you're going to have to deploy your aerial device. What I got from the shop, and they didn't get back to me and I didn't call them back, so I apologize. So many of you probably already know this, but from what I was told, that don't operate your PTO until RPMs are down to 1,000 or less. Okay. Now, if you're going to have to reduce your throttle and you've got guys inside on nozzles, on hand lines, and you're going to have to tell them that. Now, obviously, if we're, particularly on the squirts, and the quints. Well, particularly on the squirts, if we're starting to set up for aerial operations and we've probably already started pulling guys out, we're going to go defensive, at least on the main fire building, okay? So the operator must notify personnel on hand lines and other nozzles of what is taking place. Again, know your apparatus, know what it can do, know what needs to be done so that you can engage your PTO, reduce those RPMs, and make sure that you're not damaging the power takeoff system. All right, so talk a little bit about steps taken in setting the apparatus stabilizers. Our goal here is we get in position, okay, one move, one setup without having to reposition at all. And as I said earlier, once you have set up, and then the scene starts to get more chaotic, we start to get more hose lines laid, there's more personnel, there's more apparatus on scene, you may not be moving from that position. Okay, but once you do get set up, then engage your PTO and begin to deploy your stabilizers so that you can start aerial work. Okay, so before deployment of stabilizers, a couple of things you need to take a look at. If there's we need to make sure you activate your front brake lock. Your PTO engagement light should be lit, and then when you get off, you need to make sure that you chock your wheels. And then you need to anticipate the path of your stabilizers. Now, this is something that you can look at before you even getting out of the cab, before you even stop the apparatus. Okay. Get an idea of where your stabilizers are going to be, and then position the apparatus on the street or in the parking lot where you're going to have enough room to fully deploy your stabilizers on both sides of the apparatus without striking any kind of object. Okay, let me, so some things that you need to anticipate, other vehicles, utility poles, hose lines, fences, signs, other personnel on the scene, all these things you need to take a look at prior to deploying your stabilizers. Now, a couple of things you can do, if you're not real sure, use an arm span, or maybe you have a pike pole on hand where you can put some tape on it as a measuring, and use it as a measuring rod when you're deploying your stabilizers. If it looks like you're going to get close to some kind of object, whether it be a utility pole or some kind of a vehicle. Remember, in these instances, if you are close to objects and you can't get around using it, then you may have to short jack. If you're going to short jack, as I said earlier, you're only going to operate your aerial device on the side of the apparatus that has a fully extended stabilizer, fully extended outrigger. Okay? Talked about that stuff already over there on the left, but you can also use a spotter. On tiller trucks, it's really great. You have two sergeants operating, so you already have a spotter built into your crew. But if you're driving truck 4, truck 8, obviously use the firefighter as a spotter that's sitting behind you. He can also help you to view curbs, to spot for manholes and vehicles and other things like that. Again, make sure that you're checking the surface of the ground to see where you're putting your stabilizers on. Obviously, we want to avoid large rocks, fire hose, tools, Earlier I talked about underground utility covers or vaults. We don't want to be placing our stabilizers over top of these things, broken pavement. Or pavement that isn't reinforced, such as some of these alleys that we have out here and these parking lots that we have out here. Try not to put your stabilizers down in these instances. Now, I should have asked about this, but I'm fairly certain that they do not want us using cribbing. Again, this is a question you can ask the shop or look into your operations manual, whether we can put cribbing underneath our stabilizer plates, okay, maybe to help solidify, the ground that we're putting the stabilizers on, all right? But they are to be used in a very last resort. Okay, the selector valve provides hydraulic power to the stabilizing system. Now you see in this picture on this slide, okay, on the right hand side you have the master power, the interlock, and then on that second row of switches there you have an on and off switch, and then you see ladder and jacks. Okay, our apparatus does not have this switch, okay, as far as I know anyway. But so what happens is once you get the outriggers out and you get them set and you have the apparatus stabilized and level, then power transfers automatically from the stabilizers, from the outriggers to your aerial device. Now, we can override this if we have to, and you need to be able to know your apparatus and know how to do that, okay? But once you're level and once you're set, the selector valve automatically moves from the stabilization system, moves over to the aerial device itself, okay? All right. As I said in the last chapter, again, level terrain is ideal. Okay, it allows for maximum stability, allows for the greatest range of movement that can be done with the aerial device, and that can be done in a safe manner. Stabilization controls are typically found on the rear step of the apparatus, and that is so with Squirt 17, with the Quints, with Squirt 9, also with Truck 4 and Truck 8. On Truck 1 and Truck 3, and on our other senior aerials that are in auxiliary, the stabilizer controls are found on the side, on one side or the other. Okay. Okay, some general principles you need to be aware of. Many of these controls are lever type valves. Okay. So again, if they are as such, I think most of our are actually switches, but don't tap the switch a lot where you have a jerking motion when you're operating your stabilizers. Okay, try to move them smoothly, as smoothly as you can. When you operate these controls, you will notice an increase in engine speed. Okay. All right. Now we've got box stabilizers on several of our apparatus. A couple of our apparatus do have the A-frame stabilizers, but box stabilizers are the most common. Okay. And again, pretty simple. An arm extends straight out from the side of the truck, which is parallel to the ground, and then attached to the end of this extension is a jack that goes down and makes contact with the ground, and obviously there's at least one on each side. Okay. On some apparatus, the aerial device will not raise unless the extension arms are fully extended. Okay, that is true unless we need a short jack, and there are overrides that are built into the apparatus for you to do that. Again, and I know I keep saying this, you need to know your apparatus. When you get newly assigned to it, it is your job to study it and to make sure that you know how to do these operations. Okay, stabilizer pads. Again, when the stabilizers come out, the pads go down. Always. Okay? On your box stabilizers, we'll extend them all the way out, hopefully. Trying not to short jack if we don't need to. Then we'll put the stabilizer pad underneath the center of that jack. And then, you know, make sure that the foot of the jack settles nicely onto that ground plate there. When you're putting out your stabilizers, if you're operating on level ground, it doesn't matter which stabilizer goes out first, okay? It really makes no difference. However, what you don't want to do is put one stabilizer down all the way down and then deploy your other stabilizer and then set it on the ground. So you get them both out, you get them both touching the ground, and then you get the then you get it leveled as you can by moving from side to side, okay? In that kind of process, trying to get the apparatus level, okay? Now, how far the vehicle is to be raised up off the ground is up to the manufacturer and is up to the shop. And I will tell you, you know, in the time that I served as a sergeant, you know, there seem to always be changes in the opinions of whether or not tires are supposed to come off the ground or not. So your best resource for that, again, is your operator's manual as well as the shop. Give them a call. And it may differ. I cannot stand up here and tell you, you know, what apparatus are supposed to have the tires off the ground and what apparatus aren't. Okay, it's going to be your job to find that out when you get assigned to these, or you know, when you get certified on these apparatus. Okay, some stabilizers are designed to have all the tires lifted off the ground, as you see here. Okay, but it's not always the case. Okay. All right, we've talked about short jacking a little bit, but here's some slides off of it, about it. Okay, when operating restricted areas, fully extend the extension arms on the side of the aerial, the aerial device is going to be over. I've already talked about that. Okay, again, you need to be aware of how to do that, how to use the overrides so that you can short jack one of your stabilizers and then able to get the aerial device up out of its cradle. Okay, again, you don't operate the aerial device on the same side of the apparatus where it is short jacked. Same situation, if you do have it short jacked, then you need to be aware of nozzle reaction if you're using the device as an elevated master stream. Okay, so now stabilizing on uneven terrain, there's two ways. We've discussed this in the previous chapter, how the apparatus can be uneven if you have a lateral or side-to-side grade or an end-to-end or longitudinal grade. It is easier typically to stabilize an aero device on a lateral grade, as you see here. Depending on the apparatus, again, make sure you know your apparatus. What is it capable of doing on these type of grades? Is there a maximal grade such as up to 5 degrees? Excuse me. Okay. So then we need to know how we're going to stabilize this apparatus. So most manufacturers recommend lowering the stabilizer on the uphill side first. So you extend that arm, okay, lower your jack, and have the jack make contact with the stabilizer plate that's on the ground. Once that happens, then we extend the stabilizer on the low side of the apparatus, extend that jack, okay, and bring the apparatus up to level. Okay? Then the aerial device should be operated over the uphill side of the apparatus only. All right. When stabilizing the apparatus on any type of grade or uneven surface, beware of possible stabilizer slippage, which is very dangerous. This may occur on wet, icy, or snowy surfaces, or when the controls are not operated smoothly. Okay. Some things that we covered in the last chapter. Operating on a longitudinal grade is more challenging. Okay. But some things that we can do, pull past the building. Okay. This will help to minimize stress. Operate the aerial device directly off the front or off the rear. That will help. And again, if you're going to have to climb this aerial device, then positioning in this manner will also take that twisting or torquing action off of the aerial device, thereby decreasing stress. Okay? Okay. I already talked about that already. Drivers should try to avoid placing your stabilizer on uneven surfaces or on soft surfaces. Here you see in this diagram, this individual has stabilizers down on sidewalks. I will tell you that I have done this before, where I've had to do that, putting a stabilizer down on a sidewalk. But it's something that we really, really try to avoid. Again, sidewalks, parking lots, even alleys, they are not supported, they're not reinforced as typical roadways are. Okay, so you need to be aware of that and try to remain off the sidewalks if that's possible. Okay. We talked about this already. We covered that in the last chapter, talking about having to set your stabilizers on ice. Obviously, it can be a problem. You set up on ice or snow, and then that snow starts to melt, and now you have no contact with the ground itself. So always keep an eye on your outriggers, particularly in these type of conditions. Okay. Stabilizers must be locked after deployment. Again, this is automatically done on our aerial apparatus. Okay. So once the stabilizers are set, they will lock in place. They will hold in place. Power is then transferred to the aerial device. On ours, automatically, once as I said, they're set as well, and that the aerial device is level. Okay, and you see that here. Many newer apparatus are equipped with an indicator light that shows when the interlocks are engaged, and then we also have a level right there to show. So within that green area, then those interlocks will open. It will lock the stabilizers. The interlocks will open and send power to the aerial device so that you can operate that. Box stabilizers have those steel pins that you need to use. And these are a safeguard for if there's some kind of a leak or a blowout in the hydraulic system, that the stabilizers stay put, and they'll just come down under those safety pins. Now let me give you a little story about safety pins. This captain knows who he is. He was a partner of mine on Truck One, and a bunch of the older guys probably know who this guy is. But we were both driving Truck One. We were out training with it on a particular day. I don't know why we were moving the stabilizer. I don't remember if we were taking up. I think is what we were possibly doing. But anyway, he was working the stabilizer control. I was on the opposite side of the truck. I removed the pin only partially. Again, I don't remember the whole story, but I just think I know there was just bad communication. And what happened was I only had the pin partially removed. The stabilizer started going down, and it placed weight on that pin that was only in one hole. And we end up bending the metal right there around that one pinhole. So communication is vital, is the story, okay? And needless to say, the shop foreman at the time was not happy, obviously. They had to replace that the interior jack right there. And needless, like I said, they weren't too pleased with that. But it happens. But to avoid that situation, you need to be communicating with that individual that's on the controls. Okay. All right, so what do we do? Some things we need to consider when we're retracting our stabilizers. Obviously, remove your pins and get them completely out, as I just mentioned. Now, you may want to move your wheel chocks a little bit. And what the book talks about is just slide the wheel chocks out a little bit from underneath your tires, because then what happens is you start to retract your stabilizers, the wheels come down on your wheel chocks, and they may be up underneath where they pinch them between the tire and the ground, and now you can't get your wheel chocks out. So just move them out slightly, okay? Make sure you check around your apparatus before you start to lower your stabilizers. Make sure there's not any equipment that the truck may come down on, or worse yet, personnel. So make sure everything is clear, make sure everyone is clear. Then you can go ahead and raise your stabilizer, okay? Disengage your PTO, put your pads back up, put your wheel chocks back up. When the pressure releases from the stabilization system, the apparatus often drops very quickly, okay? Again, make sure there's no equipment, no personnel around before you start to raise your stabilizers to prepare them to be stowed away, okay? Let's see here. Okay, we don't have manual stabilizers anymore, so just skipping through all of this. All right, the last thing I want to talk about, and again, we don't do it anymore, is jackknifing senior aerials. As the slide says up here, most modern tillers, all of ours today, including our ones in auxiliary, are equipped with stabilizing systems that are capable of secure stabilization, whether jackknife or not. Okay, we keep all of ours in line. The tractor and the trailer stay in line. We no longer have to jackknife our senior aerials. Okay? All right, so that is the end of the chapter on stabilizing the apparatus. I hope you enjoyed. I'll be joining you guys again next week. We'll be talking about fire pump theory as well as operating fire pumps. You guys stay safe out there, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.